Hi, world language teachers. My name is Erin Austin, and I am a National Board Certified Teacher in French. Currently, I'm teaching French at an IB high school in northern Colorado. And I also present at conferences around the country. And one of the presentations I often do is about how to achieve National Board Certification in world language. So in this video, I want to cover component 3 of certifying in world language. I'll give an overview of the component, but also talk specifically about what I did in my initial certification process that will hopefully help give you some ideas, give you some direction, and support your path to certification. Before digging into the actual component, I think it's very, very, very important for all the components to familiarize yourself and really kind of become one with the National Board's 5 core propositions. It's important to understand them and also understand how to implement them in your components so that you are, in a sense, speaking the same language as the National Board. They are telling you up front what is important to them, what is good teaching to them. And so it's in your best interest to use that same vocabulary and to have those ideas in mind. And I also want you to consider that the National Board is made up of teachers and former teachers, and the people assessing your components and your work are really a lot of very exceptional teacher leaders. So it's not just like this is made up stuff from some entity that doesn't know anything about education. This is a lot of really, I think, wonderful work by people who know a lot. So the first proposition is that teachers are committed to students and their learning. So component 3 is teaching, practice, and learning environment. So you want to consider how you show that you are committed to the students in your practice or in your classroom and how you teach them, but also that you're committed to establishing a learning environment that is conducive to learning. Proposition 2 is that teachers know the subjects they teach and how to teach those subjects to students. So that gets into the first part of the component, your teaching practice. How well do you know it? How well can you read your classroom and understand what students need and why and be able to speak to that? Proposition 3, teachers are responsible for managing and monitoring students' learning. So this is all about looking at students' learning over a span of time. It's continually taking in data for individual students and classes as a whole and figuring out, okay, here's what's going on and here's how I speak to it in my practice. Proposition 4, teachers think systematically about their practice and learn from experience. So this piece is really so much about reflection. In every single component, there is a considerable amount of reflecting. I teach in an IB high school, so if you don't know what that is, it stands for International Baccalaureate. And the IB is really so intensely focused on reflection. So when I did my national board work, I thought, oh, okay, this feels familiar. This is like what students in my context really have to do. And now I'm being asked to do it. Proposition 5, teachers are members of learning communities. So that is about professional development, both formal and informal. And when I think about component number 3, teaching, practice, and learning environment, I think specifically we're dealing primarily with components 1 through 3 in the bulk of the component. However, proposition 4, that's really in all the components because it's really getting at that reflective piece. So let's dig into the component and talk about what you're expected to do in the component and maybe some things you want to consider. And this is where I'll talk a little bit about giving you some ideas and telling you the things that I did. So you're expected to describe learning goals for a particular group of students and demonstrate appropriate planning for those goals. So you may want to consider standards. And there's a lot of different things there. It might be district level standards, it might be ACTFL standards, it might be state standards, but showing that you know about standards is not a bad thing to do in any of your components. I don't think it's at all necessary to include all standards from ACTFL and all of the standards from your state and your district and the national board. They have their own standards. But I do think it's important to think about what standards really speak to you in component 3, in whatever lesson and unit you're working on. What are the standards that really apply, and how are you going to integrate those into your work? Again, not important which ones, but important that you're addressing standards somewhere. You also want to think of quantitative versus qualitative data. So I think it's easier to do well when you're considering both. When you're considering, okay, how do I look at a group of students and figure out what do they already know? What can they do? Where do I want to bring them? What are my goals? And are there goals there that I can measure quantitatively, and other pieces of the same goal or other goals that I can measure qualitatively? I think having both can be beneficial. You also want to consider the modalities of language learning. So reading, writing, listening, and speaking. I think it would be harder to score well if you only focused on one modality. I think there probably are people who do that and do it amazingly well and can really shine. But if I were your assessor, I would be thinking, okay, well, they're doing really well with this modality, but what about the other ones? It would leave a lot of questions for me. So I think it's appropriate and a good idea to consider multiple modalities. In conjunction with that, consider receptive language versus productive language. So receptive language would be the listening skills and the reading skills where you're receiving language and making sense of it. And the productive skills are where the students are producing language. So that's your speaking and your writing. So consider, can I include more than one modality? Can I include a receptive skill and a productive skill? You are expected to demonstrate strategies that you use to help students meet the goals. So it might be a good idea to make a list potentially of strategies that you use that have been effective. Just make a whole big list. And then when you figure out, okay, what you're going to home in on for the component, think, okay, what strategies are going to be best for this particular set of students for this particular goal. And I think it's a good idea to use a variety of strategies. Show that you can teach in different ways. And again, variety with modality, variety with receptive versus productive language. You are expected to be able to provide an analysis of students' growth and development. So you want to always think, okay, how can I show proof? Think about, how can I show proof that I'm meeting my goals? Again, you can bring in quantitative data and or qualitative data. Again, I think the combination of both is a good thing. And in the analysis of students' growth and development, you might want to say, are students behind in the goals that you set, and why? Analyze that. Are they ahead of the goals that you set, and why? Analyze that. I think it's less important that you actually meet the goal and more important that you are choosing appropriate goals, appropriate learning activities to meet the goals, and that you're really reflective and analytical about to what extent those goals are being met and what can be done next based on where the students are. Then you're expected to explain how your component 3 entry is indicative of your instruction. So you definitely don't want to be using strategies that are like first time trying it out, unless you're trying to tell the national board, I'm constantly doing new things and trying out new things. I think it's a good idea to show a variety again of what you do in your instruction. So consider, do you do partner work for students? Do you have whole class instruction? Do you have small group work? Do you have solo work? Do you have times when students get to choose whether or not they want to work solo or with a group? Those are all things to consider here. And think about in your class, like, what's common for you? What are the things that you're like, oh, these are my go-to activities. They tend to work really well. I have a high level of success with them. That probably is what you're strongest in. So consider including that. So those are the things that you're expected to do. Now let's talk about what you're expected to submit to the national board. You are expected to submit 2 10 to 15 minute video recordings from 2 different units, and they need to be different. The videos have to be from different lessons from what you use for evidence in components 2 and 4. So consider that. For me, what I did was you do have to have signed releases from parent or guardians so that students can be in these videos. I explained to the parents that this is a professional development thing I was doing. The videos are not going to be used in any sort of marketing. It's basically just my homework and trying to prove to the national board that I am doing right by their students. And I gave them to every single kid in every class. That way, it doesn't matter if you decide to change at the last minute. You have the releases. So I think initially I had determined I was going to do it in one level and ended up changing it just because of where my students were and kind of what was happening with the year. I thought, I think I want to try a different level. I ultimately ended up using level 3 because level 3 is my favorite of all the levels I teach. And I thought that might show through in my teaching. So I do recommend getting the signed releases for every class, no matter if you end up using it or not. Those video recordings cannot be edited. They need to be one continuous video beginning to end. You can trim off the beginning and trim off the end, but there can't be any splits while you're going through them. You also need to submit materials that you used so that your assessor can see, okay, here is the instruction that's going on and it's in the video. And then here is what students have, what was in class, and what was being used for this particular lesson. And then, of course, you need to submit commentary and reflect on what you did. Like I said, I think it's less important that you were successful by whatever standards your success is, and more important that you're showing growth and that you can truly reflect. So if you happen to have a situation where you do the videos, you're writing about all your students, things are going well, but then all of a sudden kids are kids and things get off track and you did not meet your goals that you set, don't freak out about it. I think that will be okay. So when you're considering your videos, I think it's really important to consider, how do you get the most bang for your buck? Because maximum you have 15 minutes per video. So you don't have to, I think it's important to get at least a couple different activities shown in the video, but you don't have to show all your activities from the start. So let's just say in your video, you want to show some whole class instruction that then breaks down to some solo work and then to some partner work. The whole class instruction usually takes you about 10 minutes. And then the solo work is going to be about 5. And then the partner work is going to be about another 10. So that's 25 minutes. That's fine. What you can do is just record all of that and then trim off the beginning and trim off the end. Or you can just have whoever's filming you start filming midway through that first activity, the whole group instruction. So maybe get like 3 minutes of that. Then you'll have all of that second piece, which is the solo work. Then you'll have a good chunk, though maybe not all, of the partner activity. That way, you're getting 3 different kind of modes of instruction, but in your commentary, you can write about, well, in the video, it starts with whole class instruction. That lasted about 10 minutes, but you saw maybe 3 of it, and that's totally fine. So think, how do I get the most bang for my buck? How do I show as much of what I can do and what is typical as possible? One thing that I did, a strategy I used to make that happen, was one of my videos was during a stations activity. So I had students had choice of what stations they were going to go to. And I had activities that were games, activities that were simpler, activities that were a little bit more geared toward students who needed that next level step because the stuff we were doing was too easy. I had one station that was with me doing work together. I had stations that were solo, stations that were partner. And so there was a lot of variety. So the person who was filming got to go around to each station and get a little snippet of a lot of different things that I do, as well as sometimes I do station activities. Sometimes the activities in those stations aren't part of a stations day. They're part of a regular lesson, but at least it demonstrated a pretty wide breadth of what happens in my classroom. So in the links below, I have some resources for you. The National Board puts together really great webinars where they go deeper into each of the components as well. They're typically not content area specific, but more, hey, this is all about component 2 for all content areas, or all about component 4 for all content areas. And I highly recommend those webinars. I think they're very valuable. I also have made videos that have a deeper dive into components 1 and 2, specifically for world language, where I talk about the component just like I did here, but also give ideas and hopefully some helpful tips, as well as share what I did. And then there's a link as well to just general info from the National Board. I have had a lot of people ask me to do these videos that go deeper dives into the components. And I already have one done for component 1 and component 2. This is component 3. I am not going to do one for component 4 because I hate it. I hate it. I think the National Board needs to clean it up. I think it's a struggle. And it's a little bit like 2 components in one. So please use other resources for that. But hopefully my deeper dives into components 1, 2, and 3 are valuable. If you have questions and need clarification on anything in the video, please absolutely comment below or connect with me via email or Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm happy to help out where I can. And I hope that this has been valuable to you, and best of luck with your National Board journey. I know it can be frustrating and difficult at times, but I also believe it to be really worthwhile and exciting. And I think it can help shift your practice in a really positive way. Good luck.